Okay, we're at the top of the hour. Hi, everyone. This is Leilani Cawthon, the CEO and publisher at Learning Council News Media and Research, and we're going to start the day with our research briefing. We did two big surveys this last year, one for administrators, one for teachers. This is the second year in a row we've done it that way instead of one survey. And we've got really interesting cross-analysis to everything. Then for the rest of the day, we're going to be inviting on our winners, people that we looked at, not only for their survey responses, but we actually looked them up on the web and we looked at everything about them before we actually granted awards. And so we're going to be highlighting a lot of those folks, and some of them will be on here to speak today. We're pretty excited to have them because they're all really great people. And so let's start. This is our Learning Leadership Institute National Digital Transition Survey and Awards event. Let me kind of show you what we're going to be doing today so you can follow and take your breaks accordingly and grab your lunch. So first is this hour on what's happening in the market. And then we have our first group that'll get district recognition. And then our second group, also our guest Scholastic, who's our big sponsor of the survey. Then we're going to recognize schools. And then we're going to have tech comparative recognition for a top company in the market. Keep it secret until then. You'll know who they are soon. And then we'll give you a briefing on what's going on with the big hybrid logistics project, which is about managing school space and time, big pressure point for everyone. And then teacher recognition spotlight and our predictions panel, which includes an all-star guest list. So that's where we're at. And so let me get started here with all the information that came off of our survey. And it's actually not all. There is actually more. But we're going to give you a brief summary. And I'm going to go really fast. So you'll have to watch the video again and again later on. I have with me, by the way, Chris McMurray, who's our Chief Academic Officer. And he and I are going to be passing the baton back and forth today so that I don't go hoarse from talking for too long. And he will host a lot of the panels and guests. Okay, so thanks to our sponsors, Scholastic and No Story. Scholastic stepped in. We even did some custom questions for them this year to find a couple of things out. And they had amazing results and what they saw. So we're excited to have them be a sponsor. They're going to join us briefly later on today. Okay, so two surveys, one for administrators on emerging pressures was the major theme. One for teachers on emerging needs was their major theme. Here's how it came out. We had put out over 2,468,000 surveys. We had 261,000 viewers, but not everybody completed the whole thing because it's a long survey, it's arduous. But we had 7,263 responders. We've selected from those 150 school and districts accepted as completions because they had essays and they were fully complete. They didn't skip any single questions. So really with those, we were looking also at who was responding, right? So we couldn't very well give a district an award only if it's somebody responding that doesn't have any responsibility and maybe the answers are not correct. So the way that we looked at all the data is we also put it on this backdrop, which is what's really going on nationally. This is surprising data for a lot of people. Learning Council is the only institution that looks at the off-grid kids, like how many of them are there out there, because quite a few states, you don't have to tell the state that you're just not going to enroll anywhere. You might be homeschooling, but nobody really knows because you're not registered with the state as a homeschooler because they don't require it. The off-grid kids are 4.449 million kids now. We don't know where they're coming from, but we do know the total number from the Census Bureau reports, which aren't reported necessarily by the federal DOE or NCES numbers. So when they give you their numbers, they disregard the off-grid and a lot of the homeschool and pod kids. So their total numbers that are actually still in public are low in comparison to our numbers. So if you really look at this, the total not in traditional public schools now is 37.6%. It was up by another 0.6. Homeschooling was slightly down because people went back to school. Total traditional public and charters altogether was down by 0.7. The total private and micro, which may be nonprofits, some get public grant monies, up by 1.3, mostly micro schools. Micro schools are just taking off everywhere. So this is really big, important data to understand what's going on in the market. It is far more fractured than when we started doing this survey 9 years ago. incredibly so. And the pandemic had a lot to do with that, and we all know the reasons why. So we also said, where are the teachers? Like, what happened? So last year we did this big analysis, and we found out that we were going to be 1 million short going into September of this new school year. And places like Los Angeles lost another 50,000 teachers, 50,000 students upon start this year. So the number of teachers matters in terms of how you can execute and deliver. And we only are supplying about 70,000 in graduation every year. So a lot of districts are doing desperate things. Some states have even tried to call in the National Guard. This is a moment where if you can't get the people, you can't execute. So the average nationally is 24 to 28% of classrooms are empty. Maybe your district doesn't have those problems, but a lot of them do. So spend was way up, way higher than we predicted. Up by 18.5% on EdTech. This is 43.5 billion on spend. That doesn't include staffing or paper or print. So in 2022, most of the schools got past the pandemic worries and disorientation, and they spent more stimulus funds on tech than ever before. However, it wasn't in hardware, really. Hardware was down. The hardware and major software systems, those are the financial systems, the learning management systems, Office Suites, analytics, all the other framework, all the middleware, backend stuff were down. A lot of reasons for this, but most of the hardware went into the market in 2020 and 2021. So 2022 kind of like is a year where there were few replacements, breakage and that kind of stuff. So that market still so much larger than it was pre-pandemic. So it's not like the hardware companies are out there suffering really in a big way, because the market in K-12 is so much larger than it used to be anyway. So the big number increase was in digital curriculum, massive amount of spend. So the mid-tier and smaller districts that had joined the one-to-one fray during the pandemic, instead of trying to solve everything with Office Suites, they started buying software in massive amounts. The bigger districts that have been playing in the EdTech deep end of the pool for a while, they are already into talking things like, let's do selective retirement of our redundancies, and we've got too many doing the same thing. Different sort of ball game for them, but the rest of the market is just doing I'm buying everything, and I have 1,500 apps now for everything. So that is a massive increase, way larger than we predicted. But paper resources also gained, because a lot of these companies are being pressed into, we're going to buy the digital, but we want the paper too, just out of habit, right? Like this digital transition thing we were trying it on still. So that's what's going on there. In terms of the disintermediation of the market by the consumer spend, everyone that knows me knows I talk about this a lot. This really was a jump in K-12 spend to make it at least a little bit closer in parity with the consumer spend, but the consumer spend is still growing faster. It's at 32.8 billion right now, and it was up by 4.3 billion, half of that increase of the public and private school spend. And the interesting thing about it is that when you compare it in the sectors of the market, the off-grid kids spend, the private sector schools, the charters community, even the traditional schools, a lot of those kids that are in traditional schools, so they're using your software, right? They're also buying a lot of outside stuff, which is really interesting. So there's, 12 billion in outside the, or 6.8 billion in consumer spend by the kids in your traditional public. So even the private schools experience this, but the private schools are a little bit of a different angle, because sometimes the parents will chip in and they're buying that themselves. So let's talk about the major categories of spend. So this is kind of an eye chart, but we wanted you to see the comparisons for the administrators' intentions to purchase and then considering use in 2022 versus the previous year, which is in that gray line. And then we wanted you to see what the teachers said, and then our analysis of what's going on in that category. So if we look at social emotional, intentions to purchase 28.6 at the administration level, 52% at the teacher level. This is in response to the aftermath of the pandemic, obviously, and a big cultural shift. The interesting one to us is the hybrid logistics one, which of course we're knee deep in because we do the hybrid logistics project, but we know that time and space are a big deal. And we feel that the response there, even though people don't really understand what hybrid logistics is the response to that need for time flexibility, the pressure they're feeling about, they don't want to be in the building all day, every day. They want to have a flexible schedule, or they want to have a mutated schedule. And people are feeling that. And so they're responding with really aggressive interest in something maybe they don't even really understand, which is very interesting to us. Drones are big. Learning object repositories are really big. You can see some of the other categories where high numbers came up, like live tutoring systems, esports, obviously more core courseware. Student coding is huge. We hope to compete with Europe sometime, and Australia and India, where coding is core, and we should be making it core for every age level in the United States. So we're expecting coding to take off a lot more. Virtual reality, obviously big. Motion tracking, video cameras, really of high interest by teachers, but the administrators don't seem to be interested in it at all, which is also interesting. So let's talk about what pressures. So this is a wild kind of way to show this data, but we asked, what pressures do you feel schools and teachers are experiencing now? Mark 1 for no pressure and 5 up to high pressure. This is a weighted average of answers. So there was a lot of answers that were marking everything 5. But we weighted averages all the answers. And so we came up with in the 4th in weight, when they selected, sometimes 5, sometimes 2, 4 was the average. Social emotional, number 1. This is huge. And administrators are talking about it everywhere. And then number 2, expectations of better digital communications. Huge. And then greater online course options. So you're seeing right there in 2 and 3, the space and time problem. Also the workflow problem, right behind social emotional. These are interesting charts to study. Now, let me show you what the teacher said. So they marked a lot more things at a higher level. Higher absences, number 1 for them, social emotional, number 2, learning loss, number 3. And then interesting, we gave them this option, my social emotional wellness, which is telling you a lot about the teacher shortage right there. And then also that public culture shift to expect more flexible time. They're seeing this live with the higher absences. So this is a change since the pandemic that a lot of school districts have not really been grappling with for real. They tried to go back to normal, block schedules, everybody on the manufacturing line. And that's not really working anymore. So that's why we're going to still talk about the hybrid logistics project later on. All right, so let's cite the reasons for attrition. This is what the administrators said when they investigated. And not everybody's investigating. Why are we losing these students? Flexible schedule, number 1. Different curriculum, number 2. Could be anything. Could be any reason why that is. Smaller settings. Quite a mood there. Self-paced individual attention. People were moving. Safety, very small. Emotional health, very small in terms of reasons for attrition. Very interesting sets of answers. Okay, so cited as operationally unstable areas. Number 1, instructional priorities or directives are constantly changing. This is a leadership issue that we're seeing all across the nation. When you're under this much pressure to change and you don't know where you're going, really, the change that is inevitable and what the future really looks like, you kind of just try to run more programs, right? And then that sort of impacts the teachers like, really, really more change, right? So this is a little overwhelming. Number 2, time inflexibility. So we're seeing those 2 themes. Okay. What we are versus what we want to be. Most in use in the nation is the traditional model. And then blended and flipped and hybrid simultaneously coming in, flanking each other. They're at the same rate. What do we want to be? 38% still want to be the traditional grading class manufacturing line model. Look where the interest really shifts to. Blended or flipped, hybrid simultaneous, hybrid high flex. Hybrid high flex would use hybrid logistics to change how time and space intersect the students with the teachers. Very different model. People aren't really aware of hybrid high flex, and we will talk about that a little bit later. So this is the national average of what these answers were. Remember, we had over 7,000. So people are also thinking in schools and districts, the traditional model, there's something wonky about it right now. We might need to rethink this. Master schedule, the way we've always done it, it's not really working. Okay, so the top 10 teacher needs. Number 1, the time to plan individual and small group activities around their digital learning to reduce lecture and whole group time. That means they're used to teaching in this normal way. They had tech come in, and tech is taking up all their time. And so they don't have time to plan the other sort of whiz-bangy sort of things that really drive the experience and the interest from students. This is a really serious problem, and it's a leadership issue. I'll let you sort of read through the rest of them while I take a sip of coffee. Raise your hand if you have questions, or put something in chat. Okay, what teachers think they do? This is an interesting set of questions we put in the survey this year, because one of the things we ran across is in the digital transition, the role changes. You kind of are different. You're doing different things now, right? We've heard a lot of superintendents talk about like walking around and knocking on the window in rooms where they see teachers still lecturing too much and like, get off that, get on to something, like some activity or something else. So we asked this question, we gave these were the replies. So what teachers think they do: number one, conducting a formal exchange of knowledge. Okay, normally that means they're probably doing more lectures. Number two, being a source of knowledge. Number three, tied there, a guide to help students with the prescribed content. These are interesting. Some of the comments were really interesting as well. Now look at what the administrator said. Doesn't line up exactly with what the teacher said, which is wild. Conducting a formal exchange of knowledge. Some of these flipped. Let me go back. See how the orange and yellow in the middle are higher? Go to this one. Class manager, they flip. This one isn't even the same one and under the yellow. So this is worth your studying. And the reason we wanted to show it to you is because we think one of the things you need to do in 2023 is get everybody on the same page. What's your job, right? What are we doing in the classroom? And obviously, it's not a clean answer, because different subjects require different things. Like there's a certain way you teach math, and it's different than a science lab, obviously. So you kind of have to really work your way through this, but it's a major task we really want schools and districts to listen to. Okay, what do administrators think of digital teacher work? And if you're familiar with us, we asked this question, and we've been asking it for a while. Amount of time that teachers spent on searching for digital resources, arranging those resources into activities and lesson sequences, managing all that digital traffic, right? Like you create something in Google Doc, now you got to push out that Google Doc, make sure everybody can access it, find the right folder. Oh wait, no, it's in this subfolder over here under a different topic. And then emailing back and forth and texting back and forth and phone questions, and then trying to recreate the document for one kid who needs it in a different sort of format. To individualize or whatever, and then other testing prep. 42% of administrators think teachers are spending only about 10 to 20 hours a week. Let's show you what the teacher said. Okay, so that same time spent on the teacher level, we asked three different questions. One, amount of time online, how much time you spend. And then in addition to that, how many hours you spend building your own digital learning content. And then in addition to those two, how many hours do you spend on the back and forth digital traffic of answering questions and pushing these out and distribution and blah, 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 and finding out and then grading, blah, 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 all that, checking dashboards. This averages out to 20 hours a week nationally, 20 hours a week out of, potentially a 40, 50 hour a week for the average teacher during the school year. Spend on those things. That means there's way less teaching actually going on. And we really want you to think about this, because this is potentiality for learning loss. This could be a really big reason why. It's also a really big reason why you can't personalize, you can't individualize, and it has everything to do with workflow. And what it really means is that potentially, technologically, you got a lot of whiz-bangy stuff, but it's not arrayed in such a way that it's easier. Technology is doing some heavy lift. It's really just adding more work. And you really need to think about your whole overall architecture and your workflow and what's been pre-built for the teacher so that they can just execute rather than, I got to find it, I got to build it, all that stuff. Okay. So administrators estimate of digital content resources, 72% have 100 to 1,000 apps in play. The national average is around 1,500. This is a lot of apps. This is the most sophisticated market anywhere on the planet. Higher ed doesn't have anywhere near the number of apps in play. This is because, you got a lot of vendors in this market, like there's over 10,000 where, they're doing math for K through 5, and then somebody else does 6 through 12, right? So you got a lot of apps. No market has anywhere near this apps. There's a snarky comment on the bottom of this slide. All right, so Digital resource plan, we ask about this because we really want you to get organized, and data shows that you should be. District issues pacing guides only is 32%, 28% issue that and some playlists. Here's some stuff we recommend. This would be great. But look at 84% of the market is decentralized execution of your curriculum map. That is crazy talk. And the reason it is because of that earlier data that I just showed you, which is teachers are doing too much to find sequence and then execute. At least what you could do is give them the roadmap, right? And then they can tweak it. That's totally fine. But you should definitely give them the roadmap. Okay. Schools cannot get to personalized pace without full lesson paths, right? Even if you do let every teacher build everything on their own, because what they're doing is 63% of them building as they go. That's what sticks you to a whole group, and the inability to first fully personalize pace of learning, because you're built to the whole group as you go. So if one wants to speed ahead, they can't. If one is way behind, the teacher can't assign them that stuff because they got to stick with their grade material, and that's the only thing they know. So there's a lot of permutations and logic to why this is really important. All right, we asked about Wi-Fi and smartphones. We're terribly surprised with the data. This is interesting data. Average number of Wi-Fi hotspots per institution, 559. It was huge. This is the surprising data. 16% of schools and districts now issue teacher smartphones. Why? Because they legally want to have access. For whatever reasons, emergencies happen. There was, something happened on campus that was horrible, and they need access to what the teacher was doing at the time, or they want to drop an app on the teacher's phone and they don't have legal right to do that because it's not their phone. So that's up from 3%. 37% of teachers also use smartphones in class for teaching with apps, which means they're asking their kids to pull up their phone and use things like Quizlet and quite a few other apps. Wow, who knew this? Because the mainstream media, all they want to say is like, phones are horrible, you should take them away from students. And there's a lot of teachers out there who still think the same thing. But in the meantime, 37% of teachers are secretly using them in class with their students, which is fantastically interesting. 19% of teachers do that co-utilization. All right. So interest in remote work, another interesting question we asked this year, like, if you were like the private sector and a lot of other industries, would you like to work from home more? Wouldn't that be awesome? Wow, 54% of administrators said, yeah, I'm really highly interested in that. Teachers, not so much, kind of evenly split. I think we can do a lot better on programs when we analyze the data of like what you're doing that's interesting on programs that are attractive to retain and attract students. Look at these bottom three. Only 17% offer any hybrid flexibility for partially remote students. Only 13% offer homeschoolers learning content plans. That may be part of your state's law. We don't know. And only 13% offer live chat, tech, or learning support. That's like crazy. There's a way to do that. It's inexpensive. And you should be doing that rather than try to centralize it. Nobody can get a hold of them. And so their lessons go down for the day because they can't fix something. All right. So speeding right along, got to make sure I have enough time to get through all these slides. So professional development offerings have gotten a lot better. We were so excited about this. Wow. 78% they're doing PD on their teaching practices and standards. 74% if they have one, LMS and SISs. Device training, traditional administration leadership, obviously the Google Office suites, big training in that area, video conferencing apps, blah, blah, blah. This is exciting because the tool apps and those digital assessments, interpersonal skills, those really took off. But we're really excited to say that this is really getting a lot better. So well done on you. Okay, so let's talk about our predictions, and then I'm going to give you our other sort of major analysis points. Then you can ask all the questions you want. 45.6 billion where we expect the market to go. There's still a huge amount of money in the market from the stimulus. Some superintendents say there is. What? The state won't tell me that. Well, we need to talk to your states. There's still in the neighborhood of 115, 120. Last we checked, about 4 months ago, was 125 billion. Still in the stimulus out there. If I recall the last stimulus under the Obama era, there was almost almost 6 years it took to spend it all out. So the feds will say, you got to get this deadline, but they'd have to pass another law to withdraw the money. So they can't really force the deadline. They pretend they can force the deadline. But that's probably not going to come up in our legislature anytime soon to withdraw it. So it'll still be there. Just have to find a way to get it. So I think the big winners in 2023 are going to be social emotional systems from the data, esports, huge, virtual reality, hybrid logistics, anything that's going to change your structure, how you schedule, how you manage highly flexible space and time. Those algorithms are coming to roost. Drones, learning object repositories are going to become huge because schools are finding that if somebody retires, they lose the sort of matrix of learning that teacher built, file, subfile, folder over here, blah, 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 blah. And anybody new coming in has to recreate everything. So centralizing how you execute the memory of all of your things is going to be huge. Audio and motion tracking cameras for classrooms, we think are going to be, teachers want them. Administrators don't seem to be aware of them, but they're coming because this is going to be something that you need to enhance the way your classrooms are run, so that if you're running it in small group or station rotation, it works because everybody can hear everybody. And if you're recording a lecture, the teacher can actually move a little bit. All right. The next thing I want to talk about, also, of course, networking in cloud, supplemental core courseware. LMSs may continue to lose ground. There are quite a few of these big companies out there. They've been losing money for several years, and they haven't really taken off post-pandemic, really because Google Class and Microsoft have really replaced LMS, and some of their features and functions are so extensive that now there's a lot of questioning of, do we need a learning management system? And until you see really advanced workflow that also manages time and space coming in, I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. So there's a lot of questioning of the learning management system idea. So the consulting focus on structural shift to individually paced learning, that's also going to take off because schools are desperate to sort of retain, students and also attract more back in. Let me do these are final analysis points with a lot of boring text for you. So let me just say that history shows that we're transitioning to a new age. The transition from that agricultural society to an industrial one was hard for America. It was hard all over the globe. We didn't live during then. My grandma did. But this transition now, it's speeding past tech and into the experience age. So education is being required to go at a warp speed of change. Really in the restructure of how time and space is used, not unlike other industries have restructured how time and space is used. Think about Amazon, think about Uber, think about FedEx being able to get a box anywhere in the world in 24 hours. This amount of use of logic in workflow is coming to education. And also it needs to become more student rather than teacher centric. Rather than a manufacturing line manager, we need management of the individual journey. It's all demanding levels of engagement in sync with this generation's expectations and communication patterns, which the Alpha generation, if you haven't studied them yet, they really enjoy their screen time more than humans, which is anathema to most administrators you talk to, because we all know you need a human teacher. Okay. They don't think so. By major national research on what they think and believe as this generation. It's very interesting. So tech keeps going further in every industry, and education institutions really need to catch up. So we're headed towards a future that is away from bureaucracy towards widely distributed and smaller operations. Now, I will give you a caveat on that, and that is, if you build your district that offers flavors of different things within the district, like we're going to hear from St. Vrain later on today, where they've actually created schools that are sort of branded with specialty within their enterprise. That is very interesting in terms of attracting and retaining students. But the sheer scale of the mutations that most schools really need for workflow and how they can be more digital, not less, while still having that human teaching, intersection in a more non-traditional pattern, this is hard for them to even think with. I mean, people can't even grasp what are we talking about. But it starts with how time and space is used. So investments in tech by any school or district should be prioritized to be in great orders of magnitude of change. You need to go deep in your tech stack, not let's buy this app or let's buy that app. Like, let's look at this holistically. How is this all working together? How are we unburdening our teachers and executing better with the students? It may require that you have a team and a change agent who really makes the change happen. So the big winners of future spend for solutions are going to be addressing attracting and retaining students with flexible schedules, the thrilling things they want to be able to learn, like drones, VR, robotics, coding, fixing that lower achievement, which is really going to be about fixing your workflow, first of all, and then that whole workflow simplicity. Okay, so that's analysis number one. Number two is, while schools and districts made great strides with their purchases of digital curriculum, they have yet to prove to use it at scale. Okay, there's a lot of places out there that are like, yeah, nobody used this app, so we're not going to buy it again. That say this to we hear this from the vendors all the time. Okay, well, who's in charge of that? Like, when you buy something, shouldn't there be an execution strategy? Maybe you should pay the vendor to make sure everybody's trained. What's happening with that? There should be some cohesive plan of workflow also for truly personalized learning. Like, okay, so if this app, and then we're going to use this app over here, and then this one's supplemental, and that one's core, blah, blah, blah. How does this all, give me a map. Standard, this, right? No, if this, and then there's that special need, then use this, right? We're not really doing that. It's every man for themselves in the classroom, or woman, right? So, we're really looking at the personalization still being mildly shifting resources at will by the individual teacher, but still within that overall arrangement of classes and the student traverses by their aid set. I'm sorry that you're only in third grade math. You got to be in fifth grade stuff because you're in fifth grade. So I'm sorry, you're just going to be getting lower grades right now. All right, so then the number 6 here is human teachers and administrators are still not in lockstep on what a teacher is today. And we talked about that earlier. And we think that that's a really big deal. That human resource has not yet been elevated. We should love them more by helping them be elevated by tech into critical points. And sometimes that's going to mean saying to them things like, you can't have that. You're going to be trained on this. And I know you want to mutate this entirely, but this is the way we're doing it. But you get to tweak this over here. That's totally fine. That's the hard part, because we have inculcated ourselves into saying the teacher's all, and they get to do whatever they want. That's not going to work in a tech matrix, really, because of data and what you can see happening with that individual child. And how you can know that it's the tech, it's the teacher, it's the child. What is it if you don't have any standardization, any normalization? So there's many new trends. Coding is a big one, and we think that needs to be picked up holistically by schools. People want it. Parents want their kids to learn it. It's a language of this century. It's how you tell a machine what to do. So the real problems of the K-12 market space, really, when you boil it all down, is that the institution itself is in question in the minds of the consuming public. And that is because during the pandemic, almost every parent in America got to see behind the green curtain as to what was going on in school with their kids. And that was an eye-opener. And I know not everywhere that was a problem, but there was a lot of places that it was a problem, right? A lot of schools were fantastic during the pandemic, but a lot of them, they struggled. And obviously, maybe they should have been struggling because they weren't ready for this, and nobody could have been ready. All right, so those are the final analysis points right there. And then I want to say thanks to all of our survey takers. Many of the side comments that we don't share publicly, they really touch our hearts. They were amazing. Some expressed frustration, some were expressing elation at achieving whatever it is that they were saying they were achieving. And it's really heartwarming. It's really amazing to see this number of people out there just striving right forward to get something better for their children and their teachers. So it's amazing. So that was our 9th annual survey. Like I said, there's a lot of other data in there. Ready for your questions if you want to ask me questions. And if you don't, Chris and I will just banter back and forth about what we found and what we saw in the market. I think you got to raise your hand if you want to ask a question. So you kind of go to your click thing and then you can ask a question. And then we just turn on the allow you to talk part when we see you raise your hand. Unless you're shy and then you don't want to ask a question. It's always surprising to me, educators who can lead a whole class and lecture could be shy on a webinar. That's fantastically interesting to me.
Looks like we got Peter Hoppala on the line, raising his hand.
Okay. Hey, Peter, we need to allow him to talk then. Peter, hold on. We got to find you and allow you. You're allowed, right? Oh, there you are. Allowed to talk. Okay, you're allowed to talk, Peter.
Okay. It's
Hey,
great
Peter.
to be able to connect with you again, Leilani.
Yeah, great
Chris
to
and I have
connect
had a
with
few
you.
conversations, but so I'm just curious in a breakdown on attitudes in rural versus urban or suburban schools and what happened with parents recognizing the difference or the ways kids could learn. I mean, I'm personally my kids, and I have a big family. A lot of them are homeschooling now that weren't before, and part of it was because they found out they could do it a lot quicker at home than they were getting done in the public school.
Yeah, this comes down to that whole issue of time and space. The homeschoolers have been saying for many years that they can get everything a public school can get done in 2 to 3, maybe 4 hours a day.
Right.
So why are we there for 7, right? Well, a lot of that was the structure so that both parents could work, right? Maybe you don't, if you get it done in 2 to 3 hours, with kids, that's not, you could still work a full-time job, right? You don't. So yeah, I think when we look at rural, the issue is at rural and the mid-tier size, they don't have anywhere near the number of people to craft a full digital architecture, vet all the pieces, build the full pathways, train the few teachers they have to flank everything. So there's solutions now that are entering the market, Peter, that are, let's help you build your full pathway. And then let's flank it also with an online tutoring organization so that your teachers don't have to be everything to everyone. Your teachers are then elevated to humanity. So they're your human interface. That's number one job is expressing caring and where are you at? What have you run into? Oh, that's great. You just got that done. Wow. Okay, let's give you another thing to do, right? And more importantly, when you're live on campus, there's a reason to be there. It's an experience. It's joyous. It's hands-on. We're doing something today, right? Otherwise, why are we here? Corporate America has been in that situation for, 20 years. There's corporations, that's 10 years ago. They wouldn't let you have like table level. They had bar level tables in all of their meeting space so no one could sit down, right? Because they wanted the meetings to be fast. Everybody get back to work, right? And the situation is in schools where the togetherness is not necessarily purposeful. Teachers, we had one school district tell us, this is a couple of years ago before the pandemic, they executed on digital curriculum for all the kids. And after they did that, they saw their instance of Facebook use go way up across their internet. Right. And the network guys were like, why is this happening? What are the kids doing? Well, it wasn't the kids. It was the teachers. Why? Because since they weren't doing what they were normally used to doing, they went to like just sort of check out, and they were on Facebook. So their role had not been shifted. Like, while the kids are doing this, you're roaming, you're checking, you're finding out if somebody's in, in a lock screen, they can't get out of a loop, right? This is a major shift. But just to answer your question on the small ones, they need a lot of lift. They need a lot of help. We've been asking the big districts just the other day, and Chris, you might want to comment on this as to who those people were, because I forgot already. Why don't you big districts adopt some of your smaller ones around you and share your execution, share your architecture? Remember that, Chris?
I do, yeah. Actually, St. Vrain was one of those, and Greenville was the other one. It was Jeff McCoy and Gail Charles were on the phone with us. That was a Horizon Room talk. Yep.
Yeah. And Carl Calder, yeah.
What's interesting, I just pulled up a list of partner districts with a group that I'm collaborating with. It's the Institute for Personalized Learning out of Wisconsin, and they actually specialize in small rural schools, and they've got a whole list of folks out here. And I'm just looking at Oconomowoc. I'm looking at some that are fairly small. Some of these are not super tiny, but we do have a good number of little schools that are jumping into the fray and recognize, much as you have, Peter. You and I have been having this conversation for a long time, that a shift is afoot, and I think what's happening is that the ones that are successful are reaching out to partner with somebody else to get the ball rolling. And I can't sort of overstate the importance of communication and listening and getting feedback and including the whole school community in some of that. And I think it's a journey. I do, at least from my perspective, I do see a lot of folks making that turn, and they're beginning to be more aware. The vernacular is starting to change. People are starting to ask for something new. Even in my own little town school, they're starting to look for something different, and they have the ability to do it because they're little tiny, and they can be nimble. So
if I can ask one more question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just, can you follow up on, you're talking about the less usage of an LMS, or moving away from an LMS and using Google Classroom or the Office Suites or something. How is that going to work, or what's happening there?
Well, Safari, who's going to be on later today to speak, they have a learning object repository, and they've told me that Google Class has really elevated itself to be a nearly like LMS. It's not as advanced as an LMS, but here's what we really see happening is a learning management system almost universally, and Chris and I talked about this, they're built to be teacher-centric, not student-centric. Like, you go in there as a teacher and you build like your own glorious page about you and blah, 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 right? And it's all about you, and you're designing your stuff, and then it pins around you entirely. In order to customize and personalize the journey, as an enterprise, you need to look as your teachers as a flanking the flow of the student. This one's needed here, this one's needed here, right? Rather than assigned to the teacher, and then they're in that little pool and they don't remove from that pool. They don't have any fluidity as entities in the organization. Students are corralled into like moving down the manufacturing line. So to answer your question, the whole world of LMSs themselves is in question because they're structured around an old ideology of execution of learning from a workflow perspective. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. So also there's a second part to that answer. The maturity of the small and mid-tier districts that joined during the pandemic with issuing devices to everybody, the first thing they had to learn to do at all was documents, right? So they may evolve to wanting an LMS, The really big districts are already there because, that's who the LMS companies wanted to shoot down all the elephants. Like they go after the big guys first, right? Like, oh, those guys have 75,000 students. Let's talk to them because that's going to be a big deal for us. Well, even at that level, there's questions. There's districts that are building their own things right now, like Cobb County, Georgia. So this whole arena, because of that space and time thing, is in question, and the mid-tier and the smaller ones are sensing that. Peter, you sensed that when we started talking again a few months ago. Something's going on. We need to organize for a future. What is it, right?
Right.
And what is the future is the question of what you need, right? And that's the question every district should be asking themselves, like that kind of thing. It looks like Ellen asked a question too. Do you want to be unmuted, Ellen? We can unmute you. Thank you, Peter. Allow to talk. Ellen. Hi.
Hi.
Superintendent Monty. Yeah, hi.
Good morning.
Hi.
So you were talking about how the teachers didn't know what to do, so they ended up using Facebook or other things rather than figuring out that next step. Really talks to that change of identity that we're asking educators to do. And it's not a new concept. We've been talking about it for years, but I don't know that we've been successful in helping people make that shift from deliverer of information, manager of classroom, into coach, guide, facilitator. So just curious as to techniques, ideas, how do we create that shift more meaningfully and quickly?
Yeah, and I'll say what I'm going to say, and then I'll let Chris jump in on this. But that everybody got on Facebook is really not that different from the days when teachers were lecturing and handing out books and worksheets and stuff. Like, if they had a class set up so that on that particular day everybody's reading or they're doing work, what were they doing then? Right? They weren't teaching, they were supervising, right? Everyone in the room at the same time. This is the question of time use. And at that point, they weren't instructed to figure out how to personalize or roam, because they were executing to a whole group, the mentality. So I think stage one is you don't teach a group, you teach to an individual. You got to start thinking that way, right? But I'm gonna let Chris answer that question.
That's actually a really good segue, because what I was thinking about is a conversation I had recently where a teacher said, I teach math. And I said, well, actually, no, you teach kids. And that, the question about, Ellen, and you and I have been having this conversation too for some time, the fast or quick, that's definitely not something that we can assume. These shifts take change, and it's because we're asking someone to get very personal about the thing that is at the center of their identity. And if you're a teacher, you're questioning me when you're questioning my practice. And that's a big deal. To start questioning practice, especially for veterans, for any teacher. When you start poking at that, then it's getting close. And I think one of the things that we have to start with is vulnerability. I'll go back to my friend Brene Brown, and let's talk about being vulnerable, because that's where things begin. If we can do that, then we're in a space where we're in a learner stance. And we're going to start to not feel like I know all, don't come into my bunker, and start to go, okay, well, it's actually not about me. It actually isn't. It's about them. It's about the kids. And what are we going to do? How are we going to shift practice in order to meet their needs, not my needs? I no longer need a desk. I don't really need a desk because I shouldn't be sitting in it when I'm engaging with kids. And so I think it starts with a hard look at practice, and what do we want the experience to be? What is the end goal, and how do we want kids to move through an experience? I just read an article that talked about a string of lessons and in a personalized experience, and I thought that caused me to cringe a little bit, because I thought, you could characterize that as a string of experiences. But instead, we characterized it in this reading as lessons. And that immediately puts it back into a traditional mode for a teacher. And then, of course, they're going to be like, oh my gosh, 20 different lessons happening at the same time? No, except if you think of it as experiences and fluid experiences, yes, then yes, you can. You can orchestrate that sort of stuff. That's a deep question, Ellen. We're going to have to get back on that one. We're going to schedule a horizon room around that one, because I think that's good. There's a lot of thinking around that. I saw another hand up.
Yeah, I just want to say one other thing, but to Ellen, and then let's call on whoever has their hand on, is that, it starts with the positivity of the future. The positivity is that every teacher's always wanted to teach to the one in the first place. Like, they didn't sign up to be ineffective with a whole group where some of them always fail and they have to look the other way and give them Fs. And know they failed them because they were saving the other 28 and letting the other 3 fail, right? The whole group, teach to the whole group and don't teach to the one, has always been painful for everybody. So there's a positivity to the future, which is teach to the one, never fail. This is huge, right? This can be done, especially with advanced professional digital curriculum. Becomes amazing, right? Like, this stuff is cool. It's not all of it, but a lot of it is really super cool. Okay, so it looks like Jay Fike. I hope I said that right. We're going to allow you to talk. Go ahead, Jay. Or maybe it's Andrew pretending to be Jay. Did I unmute the wrong one? Oh, allow to talk.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Hi, Jay.
Okay. Hi. My question revolved around that last piece about the final analysis, and just asking, what's the easiest accessibility to things like esports and coding? Should coding be something that we approach more as like a foreign language or second language, where we have it embedded into our curriculum based on age and grade level? I'm just interested in that piece and how to put that into, our existing system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a really good question. Let me speak first from the program perspective. The biggest concern schools have is that they don't have a coder teacher, like a teacher who can code. And that's been removed by the professional grade digital curriculum people like Tinker. Tinker doesn't require anybody to know how to code. They could just execute the software and the kids will learn, starting in kindergarten all the way through 12th grade. So you can embed it in as a core subject, or it can just be part of your CTE or part of your other, it could be part of your math classes, right? That doesn't matter. But it's definitely something that you should look at as like a new core, right? Like, it's a language of this this century. You need to speak the language of the century. And that's what Europe is doing. And the second part to my answer would be that there's an experience to coding that is fantastically realized in esports. If you make it that way. Don't just play the game, you got to be able to code to play the game, right? As well as robotics and drones. So the cross-curricular, I'm going to let Chris speak to that, because there is ways to do that to create better experience. In order to get to this stage, you should do this and this subject, and it crosses with another subject. Go ahead, Chris.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, as I think about coding, it's definitely a language, and I would place it right in between a language and a competency, because there's a number of, if you think about coding, there's a number of skills that go along with learning how to code something, right? There's some sequential thinking, there's some problem solving types of skills that are built through coding. And in terms of implementation, one of the barriers that we find out there in the field is that number one, there's a low level of understanding of what it is. And then if there is a low level of understanding, where does it fit into my concept of things that students need to know and be able to do? And if I don't understand it as an educator, then it's really hard for me to see where it's going to fit in. Where I've seen it be more successful is where there's a partnership. And Lonnie had mentioned cross-curricular. It's a partnership between between someone who is adept at coding and someone who is endorsed in social studies, sort of, or math or anything, right? It could be elementary, it could be middle. And so the integration of that and the integration of those those thinking skills is really where it becomes more applicable. Where I've seen things be unsuccessful is where it's sequestered. We know that in the very beginning, and I experienced it as a teacher in the classroom, technology in those days was in your pocket chart. It was a thing that was timed, and you had a specific time to do computers, which was bananas. And we now know that technology has to be integrated and used as a tool and as a facilitation. And coding is very similar. You have to learn some basic skills, but then you have to be able to apply that as well. And we do have partners. The last thing that I would say is find a partner. Get with somebody who's already doing it. Find a partner who can provide a resource that's top tier, and grab hands and go down the path.
Yeah, and I think one other thing to say to you, Jay, is that if you knew coding yourself, like I run a lot of coders, I can code. A couple of my coders are in the Ukraine, which is a weird place to be right now, but coding is essentially how to get something that understands only zeros and ones, essentially, it's binary logic, to execute something. So it requires you to think logically and sequentially as well as parallelly, right? Like executing this at the same time, executing that, and then go here. Huge repercussions to that in language, huge repercussions to that in math, as well as science, right? When you can teach a mind to have to think sequentially and parallelly and be able to, get something to a place logically, it has huge repercussions in what we call core now, right? Because it's a very defined skill. And that is why, employment, big deal, but that's one of the reasons that some of the European countries decided to make it core, because it has huge underpinnings to the rest of core.
Yeah, and it's jobs later. Sorry, Jay, didn't mean to cut you off.
No, that's okay. I just am trying to process everything that you're saying, and it's very useful, because I think that's my concern with some of the other things that we've done in my school district is it has been more compartmentalized and almost doomed to fail instead of integrated. And so finding ways to make that an easier transition is really important to how we're trying to move ahead.
Agreed. And I would look for examples, and if you need examples, find me. I'm not too hard to find on the website, but one thing that we have the enviable responsibility for is connecting folks. And so providing examples and models for that sort of stuff, it really does help. I mean, it helped me when I was moving systems in schools, and to be able to see it and to be able to bring a team to see something done and applied, and to see the success with the kids is invaluable. When you start thinking about moving mindset and process and practice, it's really critical to get that component in the adult learning.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, it looks like we have a lot of people on here. I'd love to ask questions back to them, but we need to move on to our next hour and have some of our fantastic awards spoken of. So Chris, I'll be here in hindsight. I'm going to pass you the baton.
Perfect. Thank you.